What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. I've been doing the title question for about a week now, so I think I have a big enough sample size. It's fairly evenly split, with slightly more people saying they'd prefer the Megamix title, so we will be sticking with that for now. I did see some confusion. The Megamixes on the weekdays are all news stories, as well as I can keep track of at least. Please remember that I do read about 2,000 stories a year, so I'm not going to be able to keep track of all of them all the time. There will be some repeats every now and again, although I do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. There were also some people complaining about the amount of ads in recent videos. I don't really know what to tell you guys about that. I've not really changed the frequencies of my ads at all in the entire time I've been doing YouTube, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. With all that being said, if you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing any of those helps the video to do well, and the channel to do well, and ensures I can keep making these videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as reading your guys' comments is one of my favorite parts about doing these videos, even if I don't respond to them often since I'm so busy. Last but not least, if you'd like to support the channel further than you already do, there should be a join button somewhere around the subscribe button. It's only $2 a month at the lowest tier, and you get special emoticons to use when you comment, and a special symbol next to your name. No content is locked behind the paywall. It's simply something you can do if you'd like to support the channel further than you already do. Without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll get right into the video. I'm a fisherman from Long Island. My boat is not huge, and I'm not full-time either. I would never be able to make a living off of what I catch alone. I do make a little bit of money off of it though, and wouldn't stop doing it for the world. That's because I just really enjoy it. I had a really weird experience a few years ago, however, that made me a little bit hesitant to venture out for a couple of days. I had a bad case of Murphy's Law, which led to me experiencing something pretty chilling. I went out fishing with my buddy Dan. I need at least one other person to man the boat with me. We had gone out pretty far, because, well, you have to if you really want to catch anything good. The water around New York, other than being terribly polluted in certain areas, just isn't rich in fish until you stray pretty far out. The first thing that went wrong? We kept on having problems with our equipment the entire day. That should have been a warning signal to us that this wasn't going to work out. Rather, we just treated it as a challenge, though. The second thing that went wrong is the fish weren't biting at all. And I mean at all. It was one of the worst days I've ever had. You'd think we would have given up and gone home, but we were already going this far, so we had to keep trying. We stayed out longer than we ever had before. We decided that once the sun began setting without a single bite all day long, we needed to head back in for the night. That's when the third thing went wrong, of course. The damn engine on my boat broke down. We tried to fix it, or at least fiddle around with it as it were, but there wasn't a whole lot we could do. We had to radio in for help. Yeah, can you see where this is going? Fourth thing that went wrong, our radio immediately went on the fritz. Just one thing after the other. The sunset was beautiful, but it didn't last long enough for my taste. We were now adrift in the middle of the ocean, with no way of contacting anyone. I sent out an SOS signal, and at least that was working. I didn't get a reply though, so that was pretty discouraging. With the darkness came the cold as well. We could go into the boat, but because we were adrift, we couldn't just stay under and wait. We had to be on deck long enough to tell what was going on. It wouldn't do to have a big ship come along and crush us, or even a smaller, less friendly boat coming by without us knowing. Plus, the possibility of hitting anything was terrifying. At one point, though, it was just so cold that Dan and I both had to go below deck to get warmed up for a few moments. My lights were working fine still, thank God. Then something happened, though. The entire boat shook, and there was a huge noise as if we just collided with something. I immediately cursed at myself for staying below deck for too long. Of course, this was the day something like this would happen. The cracking sound and reverberation of the hit wasn't severe, so more than likely it was just something like a buoy. Even a buoy, though, could cause enough damage to sink a smaller boat. Even worse, though, immediately after the collision, all lights in the boat and on deck shut off. If you've never experienced pitch dark away from a city, you won't be able to understand what happened. It was completely dark. You couldn't see a single thing. Dan and I immediately shot up and knocked some things over. Fortunately, we were able to stumble around until we found the flashlight. Once we could see a bit, I told Dan to grab the lantern, get it lit, and meet me up on deck. I had to run up to see if we had hit something. I sprinted onto the deck and immediately froze when I saw something I cannot explain to this day. Standing on the bow of the ship was a person, an honest-to-God person. He was dressed like a fisherman as far as I could tell, but even with the flashlight shining on him, I could barely make him out. I could tell the man was looking at me, but he wasn't doing anything. He just stood there staring. Dan ran up behind me with the lantern. As he did, he saw the figure standing there too. He dropped the lantern as he yelled out in surprise. The lantern went out, and now we only had the light of the flashlight to go by. I tried to call out to the strange man, but as I opened my mouth, he leaned backwards and fell off the bow of the ship and into the water. Dan and I were terrified. We ran to the bow and tried to look over, but it was so dark we couldn't see anything in the water. We yelled for the man, trying to get him to communicate with us so we could save him, but there was no response. About 10 minutes after the man fell off the boat, the lights came back on. Not only that, but the engine also started working again, and so did our radio. We used the spotlights to search in the water, but we were still unable to find the man. There were no other boats, no buoys, and the man was nowhere to be seen. We drove the boat back to shore, and when we inspected it, there was no indication we'd hit anything at all. I really can't explain what happened that night. I can't even begin to speculate on what it was. I do know, though, that it was the scariest experience of my life. Have you ever heard of Camden Park? It's a really small amusement park in West Virginia. I grew up in that area, and at the time, Camden Park seemed like a really big deal to me. Since then, I've moved to Los Angeles, and when I moved there, I started going to Magic Mountain. Ever since then, Camden Park just seemed like a really small playground in comparison. Still though, my very first part-time job was at Camden Park. I was simply working in a food booth, but it was a pretty big thrill for me really. I got to hang out in the park for free when I wasn't working. Now, you might think that I wouldn't want to do that since I was already working there all day, but honestly, I really enjoyed it. One evening though, this happened. Sometimes, if the park had a particularly low attendance, they would allow the night operator of the Big Dipper roller coaster to continue to have the train cycle through the ride over and over without changing passengers. I was in the park this evening, and I was the beneficiary of several such cycles. The ride operator, Chet, was much older and a stereotypical carny type. He was one of those guys who always had some tobacco on his lip, even if he was drinking soda or something. He always smelled like he'd been drinking too, but definitely not soda. He was a nice enough guy though. He always made me feel a bit uneasy. He was one of those people who would trap you in a conversation, and if you were too nice, he wouldn't let you go. This happened to me quite often. My friends all made jokes that Chet must have the hots for me. I didn't really like those jokes much though. On this night though, when he finally stopped the train, he made it a point to come over and help me out of this. When he did this, his hand quote-unquote slipped and rubbed against the front of my blouse. He apologized for it, but the smile on his face told me it was no accident, and the apology was not sincere. Work became a bit uncomfortable for the first time. Every time after that, Chet would be working nearly every day and would start coming over several times a day to talk to me. I'd stopped going to ride on the Big Dipper when he was there, simply because I didn't want to have to see him. He would ask me why I didn't come visit him, and I had to tell him I'd just been really busy. Even though I told him this, it never stopped him from coming to see me over and over every single day. On the days when he would get off around the same time I did, he would wait outside the park to walk me to my car. It started to get even weirder though. He would be waiting for me on days when he didn't even work. One night, when I was closing and going out to my car was one such night. Chet found me outside the park and started coming after me to my car. He was talking kindly and actually asked me out on a date. I explained to him that I was only 16 years old, and obviously he was much older. "Well, I won't tell anyone if you don't." I quickly declined and hopped into my car and left. And that was all I needed to hear to know that this was a bit worse than just a harmless crush. He insinuated he wanted to have sex with me as an underage girl, and that was really wrong. I only had a few more weeks before school started, so I talked to my parents. We agreed that I should just go ahead and quit that job. For a while afterwards, I actually didn't hear anything from Chet. To my surprise though, he actually showed up to my school's homecoming game that year and tried to sit down next to me. Luckily, I was with friends and they were able to make him go away. He did also follow us out to the parking lot after. That was not the last time I saw him either. He began to hang out just off school grounds, and I'd see him many a time after school waiting for me. Late in the fall, I actually got a phone call from Chet. I was quite worried. I had no idea how he'd gotten my number. He began asking me why I'd quit working there, and asked me if I wanted to get together with him once again. I told him once again that I was underage, and he insisted that didn't matter. I told Chet to leave me alone. I would never date him, and I didn't want to talk to him ever again either. Of course, that didn't stop him. Chet would keep showing up everywhere. I assumed he must have also been watching me even when I wasn't aware, because the final time I ever saw him, he found me when I was alone. It was a day after school. I was walking to my car at night when Chet came around the side of another car just as I was getting into it. He ran up just as I slammed the door. He kept asking me to open it. I refused, telling him yet again to leave me alone. He was grabbing my mirror in his hand. He lifted his shirt up, and I saw he had a knife sheathed under his shirt. Chet saw the fear in my eyes when I saw his knife. He smiled at me and said, "That's just Beth. She won't hurt you if you go out on a date with me." I freaked out at that point. I slammed the gas even though he was holding my mirror. I think I must have ran over his foot with my back tire, but I didn't really care. I rushed right home and told my parents everything. We called the police as well. I told them everything that happened too, and that I felt like he had been threatening me. The police apparently had a talk with him, and it must have worked because I never saw Chet following me around after. However, not seeing him didn't make my life any more comfortable. He always had a tendency to show up when I least expected it, and I'm sure he must have still been watching me even if I didn't see him. I never went to Camden Park again. I have no idea if he continued working there or left sometime after. When I turned 18, I went to college in Los Angeles, and since then, I much prefer Magic Mountain. My girlfriend's mother is a long-time heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's entire life. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity often. She was forced to move out at a young age just in order to stay alive. She thought her mother was finally clean when her mother announced a new pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend decided to try and be supportive of her mother, since she thought she was clean. That was until she overdosed while pregnant. At that point, she decided to cut all contact. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter, and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the state, since she knew it was not a safe situation for the baby. Unfortunately, the baby died in their house not even a month after birth, due to an overdose with signs of physical abuse. Her mother was arrested for the murder of the baby and other charges as well. Her husband was arrested for child endangerment and other charges very recently. At first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, though, her husband was granted bail, which he posted. We didn't know this until recently, which helped us put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just chat and listen to music and relax together. Recently though, there have been some weird black cars orbiting my girlfriend's house. We've also been frequently followed by black cars when we drive around. It's the same couple of cars that do this as well, not just random ones. At first, we thought maybe we were just paranoid. Everyone was supposed to still be in jail. Then though, we found out the husband had been let out, and we began to doubt it was really insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I had gone on a dinner date. We went home after dark and sat in her car for about 45 minutes when we noticed that black car passing us by every few minutes. After 10 minutes of passing us by, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on just when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought it was going to slam into the passenger side of our car. It sped away and we ran inside. After that, we started noticing these black cars more and more. This past Wednesday morning at around 3 a.m.-ish, that same distinct black van we'd been seeing pulled up outside my house. This was weird because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes away from each other in two separate cities. A man got out of the van and began shining a flashlight into my windows, scanning it almost. He shined the flashlight up to the window I was sitting at and kept it there for a moment. He walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, scanned everything for 20 seconds, then jumped back in the van and sped away. The windows were ice-covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of who was in the van. It was quite strange though, obviously. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van once again hiding behind another car parked further up the street. We could only see one headlight. It creeped by us as we sat in the car and tried to hide. My girlfriend lives between two dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U. The van went up the first dead end 4 ways on and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost into the other lane of traffic just to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought it was weird that the van didn't just back out at the first one, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around. After a few minutes, we called a friend and recounted the story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking, I got out of the car for a moment to light a cigarette and see how far away the van was now. I was simply walking for about 15 feet before I got the worst gut feeling I've ever gotten in my life. I could see across the street from me, hidden in an area with no lighting, was a black mass much darker than the darkness around it. I assumed this must be the van. I decided to turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot rushing up the wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hopeful that would be enough to barricade it. A few minutes later, we heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squealing and a car driving away. It was so surreal we thought maybe it came from the TV, but we realized we had paused it, and the TV in the next room was never loud enough to feel this real. I went downstairs an hour later to get water. There was nothing damaged or missing. We theorized that maybe they'd been trying to open the front door, but it was dead-bolted so they couldn't actually get in. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we'd never heard car sounds before. The next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house when I saw the same black car with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block around me about 4 times. I was able to see the silhouette of the man driving through the passenger side window. Each time, it was the same person in the same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town, and we were able to catalog the entire neighborhood's worth of cars. The black van and the truck were nowhere to be found, though. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not further testifying, or flat out make sure neither of us has the ability anymore. We really just need more opinions. What do we do in this situation? Do you think it could just be a series of weird coincidences? Back in high school, I used to hang out with some pretty intellectual kids who were also pretty artistic and such. I guess I was pretty smart too, but I was always a bit of a slacker in the education department. I had a good time talking to these people though, and we were all involved in the drama club at school. Even though I was the new kid, I found a group of friends I felt like I really fit in with. I never went to parties as a teenager, and I probably wouldn't have wanted to go even if I were invited. I wasn't the type who drank, and I didn't like being in huge groups of people either. My friends never went to parties either, so that was another way we got along. We did have little get-togethers though at night, but only between our group of close friends. We always referred to them as poetry readings, even though we never actually ended up reading any poetry. When I first got involved with these guys, I found I had a minor crush on this boy named Nick in the group. I had always been shy about my crushes though, and for the longest time I didn't reveal this to a single soul. Every time we were near each other though, I would get those butterfly feelings inside I'm sure you're all familiar with. Nick did work on set design, and there were times when late at night he and I would be the only two people left after everyone else went home. During that time, we would talk a whole lot for hours. I often missed dinner because I would get home so late after having our conversations. That didn't really matter to me though, because I enjoyed his company that much. Often, as the night got longer in our poetry readings, a female friend and I would be the ones that talked pretty late into the night. I didn't have a curfew ever, so I could stay out as late as I wanted. I really enjoyed spending those late nights talking to her. Plus, I lived really close to my friend Elaine's family's second home, and her parents allowed us kids to have our little meetings there. It was close enough I could just walk. This was a really weird night though. It was November, and we always got snow in November. This was quite the heavy storm that began falling though, even before I left the house. It was one of those ones that when you walked out into it, you couldn't see 10 feet in front of yourself. It made you feel isolated and sort of alone. I didn't mind walking through it though in order to get to the hangout with my friends. I got there a bit later this particular time than usual. I was looking forward to spending time with my female friend, but not long after I arrived, her mother called and summoned her home. I was feeling a bit disappointed because obviously she was my best friend and I really enjoyed spending time with her. Because of that, I began to talk to Nick instead. Nick asked me if I wanted to go to an upstairs room and watch the snow fall out the window. I, of course, jumped at the chance to spend some time alone with him. We went upstairs and we left the lights out in the room. It was unfurnished, as was most of the rest of the home. Nick and I spent a good amount of time there talking. I can't explain this very well, but it had a strange intensity. I'm sure most of you know how it feels being a teenager and being alone with someone you had a crush on. You expect something to eventually happen. Nick was staring me right in the eyes. He asked me if I wanted to see something. The way he asked got my heart beating real fast. I nodded at him. He lifted his shirt up. My teenage libido was pretty worked up, thinking that something intimate was going to happen, but that was quelled pretty quickly. As I looked closer, I could see Nick had a ton of fresh wounds on his body. He had welts and cuts, and it looked like he'd been tortured by someone. I asked him what happened. Nick told me he'd been tied up and attacked by someone that he met. It was supposed to be an intimate meetup, I guess, but it didn't turn out that way. Nothing sexual happened, but once he was tied up, they smacked him with a whip, stabbed him with a knife, and basically hurt him all over. When it was finally over, his date grabbed him into his car and callously dumped him off in front of his house. There were tears in his eyes while he told me this story, but I wasn't feeling the same. I was feeling extremely angry. I asked Nick who it was that did this to him. At first, he refused to tell me. Finally, though, he told me he'd met this person on a dating website, which he'd lied about his age on. He even told me the specific username. He broke down while I held him, but he tried to make me promise I wouldn't do anything. Later on, though, I went and created a profile on that site he had used. Before I could even try to look for the guy that hurt Nick, he contacted me himself. He asked me if I was into kinky stuff like bondage. I didn't know what I was going to do. I sat there and looked at the message he sent me. I sat there and looked through his profile. I thought of all the wounds he inflicted upon the guy I had a huge crush on, and I wondered what I was going to do. I wanted to meet up with him and give him a taste of exactly what he'd done to Nick. I could feel the anger in my stomach, telling me to meet this guy. Ultimately, though, I decided against it. I'm sorry if you think that's being a chicken or whatever. I didn't meet him because I know I would have killed him. That's exactly what I was feeling. I wanted to grab my father's gun and shoot him in the face for what he did to my crush. I've never felt more sure of anything in my entire life. It's not a feeling I enjoyed, of course. I rejected it because I didn't want to ruin my life by doing something stupid. Nick refused to report him to the police, and I respected his wishes. If you ever have the urge to kill someone, I hope you never do. It's a cold, empty feeling that will surely haunt your soul for the rest of your life. I, 29 and female, grew up in a nice suburban neighborhood. I lived in the same house my entire childhood and only left once when I moved out as an adult. I always felt safe leaving our doors unlocked, windows open, going out for late night walks as a teen. When I was around 17, though, I noticed some strange things started happening around my house. My house was also supposedly haunted, so there were often weird noises and moving things on their own. It wasn't a new thing. This is probably why I dismissed my own experiences for so long. As a teen, I worked at a movie theater, and I did not work until the afternoon. I would get off at very late at night because of this. I turned into quite the night owl, and it was normal for me to stay awake until about 3 o'clock in the morning. It started off as my dog reacting to things outside. I would peek out my window to see what was going on and never actually see anything, so I assumed my dog must just be hearing noises and overreacting to someone passing by or something. Not too long after this started, though, I went outside and noticed there were handprints and a mark between them on my window, as if someone had been pressing their forehead against the glass. I didn't really know what to think of this. I had plenty of friends coming in and out of my house, and they would knock on my window sometimes as they arrived. My window was right by the driveway as you walk to the front door. This window was also very large as well. It started about 3 feet from the ground and went at least 8 feet high and 4 feet wide. The window and forehead marks were about 6'5" height. I definitely didn't have any friends who were that tall though, and everyone in my family was less than 5'6". Soon after that, I woke up around 5 in the morning to my car alarm going off. Again, I kind of dismissed the situation in my grogginess. This happened a few more times within the next few weeks though, always about 4 to 5 in the morning, and I began to get slowly more suspicious. The last time I noticed handprints on top of my car, as if someone had tried to crawl in through my open sunroof or something. After that, I started making sure to close all my windows and lock every door. This time, I thought maybe it was some hoodlums trying to steal something since everything had been open. Not long after the car incident, though, things started to escalate. One morning, as I was leaving to school, I found a small stepladder outside my window leaning against the house, as if someone had been looking through my window during the night. I had blinds that would move from top to bottom. Normally, I had the blinds closed on the bottom and left about 2 feet open on the top to allow sunlight in but still have privacy. When I looked at my window, I could see handprints and a forehead mark placed right above the opening of my blinds. Obviously, they'd been using the stepladder to peek in and get a good look of my room. With this ladder against my window, I pieced together the events over the past few months and realized I had myself a peeping Tom. I brought this up to my parents, but they did not seem to worry at all. In fact, they made no effort at all to do anything about it. Over the next year, I found the ladder against my window many more times. This person was using an old stepladder we had in the side yard that was unlocked. I would continuously put it back in the side yard, but it would always show up next to my window in the morning. I don't know why I didn't just put the stepladder in a place that was not accessible. To be honest, I was smoking quite a lot of weed at this time, and I was not really using my critical thinking very much. 2 other sisters lived with us, but they didn't seem to notice anything weird happening. It only seemed to be happening to me. About a year after I noticed the occurrences, though, we found my sister's bra out in the yard. We didn't have any explanation for this. At this point, I realized that somebody may actually be trying to get into the house when we were gone, with some success now. I became extremely paranoid. We would often hear male voices outside our front doors, but my family attributed this to the house being haunted. My sisters and I were often home alone, and when these unexplained voices happened, we would just go to our room to turn on some SpongeBob and try our best to ignore it. Again, my parents were aware of all of this, but they didn't care to do anything about it, I guess because they assumed it was just a ghost or something. The last incident before we called the police was just after a rainy night. We found bare footprints outside my sister's window in the mud. The screen had been fiddled with, as if somebody was trying to get it off the window and get inside. Once this happened, my parents started to take it a lot more seriously. It's kind of funny in a way. They didn't really care when the things were happening to me, but the moment my sister had an experience, well, it's time to report it. The police couldn't do anything about it, though. They offered to send an officer every once in a while to fill out their paperwork in front of our house to make it seem like there was a constant police presence. This only happened one time, though, and they never came back. Afterward, my older sister made her boyfriend aware of the situation, so they'd help and sit in the car all night and watch for this pervert to show up. Every time he would try and pull an all-nighter to catch this person, no one would arrive. Looking back now, it makes me think someone very close to my house must have been the peeping Tom. He must have been close enough to see we had another person watching out for us. After a few years of these experiences, my sisters and I all moved out, and we've not experienced anything weird ever since. It still bothers me knowing this person was never caught, and we still have no idea who it was. It frustrates me knowing it could be a next-door neighbor who we thought was normal, but was actually a pervert or something. This was all happening in the mid-2010s, and was before we had easy, affordable access to security cameras, such as Ring and Blink and such. I wish we had cameras at that time so we could know who this person was, but I guess there's no point in dwelling in the past. I will always have security cameras around my house, especially if I have young daughters. I grew up in a rural community. Although I won't mention exactly where it was, we really didn't have much in the way of entertainment. It was a big deal when the county fair took place each year because of this. It was fun enough when I was a kid, but it was much more fun when I was a teenager, and I got to go there on my own. I wasn't particularly popular in school, and I was a bit of a loner as well. That's okay though, I liked that. I was one of those guys who dressed all in black, had black hair, and didn't go out much. We didn't have designations such as goth back then really, and I guess it wouldn't have applied to me much anyway. I was sort of my own thing. It was fun for me to just have some money in my pocket and be able to spend the evening and enjoy the lights and noises and people of the carnival. On this night, I had just finished filling myself with all sorts of terrible treats. Corn dogs, cotton candy, gallons of soda. I was eating an elephant ear as I walked past the rides. By this point, it was completely dark out, and the full lights of the fair were on. It was something else to see, and it was such a different atmosphere than I was used to. I used to think that this must be what it was like to walk through a city at night. I've since learned it's very different, of course. This was also happening back in the 1980s, when they were playing lots of 80s hairband music. Very loud, of course. I didn't want to go on any of the rides so soon after I'd stuffed myself, so I decided to just wander around to the carnival games. Perhaps there'd be something I wanted to play. There were of course lots of people who were there with their families and girlfriends and some such. It seemed like I was the only person there by myself. Like I said earlier, that's just how I liked it. It got the attention of someone at one of the booths though, and I would have preferred it didn't. "Hey, what's the matter, kid? Can't find a girl to take pity on you?" I heard a voice say. I knew he was talking to me. I snapped back and looked. It was a guy who was running a dart booth. You know, one of those games where they have balloons and you gotta hit them with the darts to win a prize. He was just a hideous-looking person. He had dry, wrinkled, and scaly skin, maybe only a few teeth left in his grin, obviously blackened by the tobacco he was chewing. I can't even do justice to how ugly this guy was, and yet for some reason he decided to just insult me. I mean, I knew he was just doing it to try and raise my ire and bluff me into playing the dark game. It was infuriating though. Why did he have to pick on me for no reason, especially talking down about my appearance? I was so annoyed I shot back at him. Looks like you know a lot more about girls taking pity on someone. The guy's face changed before snapping back to a smile. I could tell he was none too happy about my comment. Well, why don't you try your luck here? He asked. Most of the prizes were these small square mirrors that had pictures on them. Some were pictures of hard rock bands, some were cartoon characters. They also had some with pictures of scantily clad girls or equally scantily clad men on them. The guy at the booth picked up a mirror that had a guy wearing nothing but a thong. I bet you're just dying to have this one, huh? The man was irritating enough on his own, but I hated it even more when he made comments about guys being gay as if it was a bad thing. I went ahead and went up and gave the guy $1. He gave me 3 darts. It's been so long now that I don't really remember exactly how the game went, but I did win on the first 3 darts somehow. Then, just to piss this asshole off, I had him give me the mirror with the guy on it. His eyes grew wide and he paused, but he handed it over. I guess I was feeling like a real tough idiot that night, cause just to piss him off even more, I took the mirror and licked the picture of the guy on it. You know, just to really get under his skin. He started calling me slurs and said some other things, but I simply walked off. I kept the mirror, thinking it would be a lovely gag gift for my sister. Of course, I stayed much later at the fair though. It was closing down when I finally decided to go home. It was weird how dark the area got when the lights began going out. On the way out of the park, I had to go past the games once again. That area was completely pitch black because the games had closed down earlier than the rides. Even though the games were closed, that carny from the dart game was still there, leaning against his booth and staring at me while smoking a cigarette. Immediately, I looked away. I didn't think he'd followed me at first when I left the fairground and headed out to my car. It was a bit of a long hike. The parking lot was a pretty big field. There weren't really many people walking around now either. I tried to hurry to my car without making it seem like I was hurrying. I kept on feeling like I was being watched or followed, even though, logically, to myself, I didn't have any reason to be feeling that way. I doubted some carny would be stupid enough to actually try to follow me and do something. If you've ever had that feeling, though, you'll know that sooner or later, you have to give in and look behind you. When I did, sure as hell, I saw that nasty carny following me. This was all I needed. I'd seen way too many scary movies where a person is being followed and they pretend like they haven't noticed and walk slowly. I didn't care. I took off sprinting towards my car. I didn't look behind me again, but when I got to my car and turned to face the door so I could put my keys in, I saw the man had been running after me the entire time. I didn't even have enough time to get my keys out of my pocket and into the keyhole before the man tackled me to the ground. I fell hard on my ass, and the man punched me right in the nose. I coughed and spit out some blood. The man smiled his nasty, toothless grin at me and reached behind him. He pulled a knife out of the back of his belt. He took the knife and placed it up against my face, then traced it down to the crotch of my jeans and held it there, the point against my zipper. I tried to push him off me, but I just couldn't. He had way too much leverage on me. Only girls should so I guess I'm just gonna have to cut yours off, he said. I spit some blood out in his face and told him I wasn't really gay. I was just trying to piss him off, but he didn't seem to care now. The knife ripped through my jeans and my boxers, and even caught a bit of my flesh. I screamed in pain. Finally, though, something good happened. Someone tackled that bitch right off of me. I didn't know who it was at the time. Some big jock guy wearing a leather jacket, but he took that carnival freak down easily. It was quite fortunate for me. Although there were not a lot of people left in the park, it was also not completely empty. Several people also leaving had seen the freak chasing me, and lucky for me, one was this big friendly fellow, who I later learned was named Thad. The carny got arrested, and I went to the hospital for the wound on my crotch. Fortunately, it healed pretty well, left a funny-looking scar as well. It's been a wonderful story to try and pick up women afterwards. I usually tell them, hey, you want to see something funny? Honestly, maybe not the best lead-in, but it works well enough. Oh well. Anyway, fortunately for me, I have no PTSD for fairs or anything after. There's also not really any dramatic ending to the story. I went back to the fair next year like always. What else am I gonna do in that town? I am, however, more careful about who I try to antagonize now. Trigger warning: physical assault. My story takes place 2 years ago in France. I was home alone in my small apartment, working on something for my internship that I was really stressed about. It was the beginning of the afternoon, around 1400 or so, I think. Someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone that day. I went to open it up to see who it was, only to see it was a person I knew. Let's call him Jim. Jim and I had actually slept together a few times a few weeks before, until he suddenly pushed me away without any explanation. We were still friends, I guess, but of course I was really hurt. Was I that bad? Had he gotten what he wanted and wasn't interested anymore? I didn't dare to ask those questions because I was getting a little bit attached. I preferred to just wait for it to pass, especially since we were bound to run into each other once again. Indeed, Jim had recently gotten a room in the flat of a friend of mine. The situation was quite funny to me. He had stumbled upon the ad without even knowing that I knew this person, and my friend didn't know that I knew Jim either. I was going to tell her about it in person when we met again in college for our midterms. I'd known I was going to see him again because of this, but I didn't expect to run into him so soon after he moved in, let alone a surprise visit to my apartment. I asked him what he was doing here. He said he was quite bored and just happened to be passing through. I invited him in and I was a bit uncomfortable. I still liked him, and he had left without any explanation about his rejection before he moved in with my friend. We talked for a while about trivial things, but strangely enough, I still remember the main points. He said he wanted to show me a new kind of massage against my stress he had seen on TikTok. I hesitated a bit as I was still uncomfortable. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes." I sat on the floor and he touched my back for a while. I don't remember everything, except for at one point he wrapped his arm around my neck. Suddenly I thought, I can't breathe. Then I blacked out. Of course, the memory of choking didn't come back right away. It took several months after. When I came to, though, even without the memory, it was dark. I was still on the ground and bleeding. I don't even remember if I noticed the injury right away, but I had a large hole in my right side with many cuts underneath. The events are fuzzy in my memory. I wondered where Jim had gone and why I was suddenly alone and bleeding. I went to look in the hallway, but my keys, which were normally always there, were missing. I found the spare and looked outside. No one was around. Then I had my first stupid reflex. I'm hurt. I need to disinfect this area. I started to take a shower. After that, I fell asleep from exhaustion. I had nightmares of being tortured and kidnapped in the shower. Probably a way for my brain to try and warn me something really bad had happened. I looked for my phone, which I now noticed was also missing. I thought it must have been a dream or something, that's how out of it I was. I told myself, if I'm still hurt when I wake up, then this must all be real. It seemed logical to my mind in that moment. I think I may possibly have been drugged or something. When I woke up again, my mind was a little bit clearer, but I was still not totally back to myself. It was around 2100, I think. I was still bleeding profusely. I looked for my phone again and started to panic as I couldn't find it. I tried to calm down. I told myself it must be around somewhere. I just had to ask someone to call me. I tried to jump on my computer and message someone via Messenger. I had a hard time unlocking it. I couldn't type in the code because I was so groggy from being drugged. Luckily, one of my friends was online. He tried to call my phone, but no ringing was heard in the apartment. I think he figured out something was wrong with me because he called me on Messenger to see if I was okay. I started to give him details of what had happened, although I can't really remember what I was actually saying. Apparently, I told him, if you think you've been hurt, should you call the fire department or the police first? He got freaked out and asked me to explain what was going on. I was still confused, of course, but when I showed him the wound, I think he got the gist of it. Who did this to you? Did Jim do this to you? I don't know, maybe. I was still in denial at that point. Tom called the police for me. He couldn't come to help me himself because he was away in another city. And as I waited for the cops to arrive, I began to realize I had completely fucked up the crime scene by touching everything to look for my phone, not to mention taking a shower and the nap, which probably should have killed me in retrospect. I still wasn't feeling any pain though somehow. The big hole in my side started to finally hurt when I was being taken care of by paramedics. I had to undergo surgery as a result of this assault. It took me several months to accept that someone had tried to murder me with a knife. I had a hole in my liver, a pneumothorax, and I was bleeding quite a bit. Luckily, my other major organs were not affected. While I was in the hospital, the cops came to take my statement and took Jim into custody. Imagine the surprise of my friend and her roommates when they found out the new roommate they got not only knew me, but was accused of robbing and trying to kill me. 1 week after the assault, when I left the hospital, the first bad news was that the cops had not been able to retrieve the recordings from surveillance cameras in my building. They had already been erased. The next day, the policewoman in charge of the investigation told me that of course Jim denied having been at my place that day. Since nobody was at the flat to confirm, they couldn't do anything. That's it for now. Go home to your parents and get some therapy. Yeah, great. Then I waited for a long time. I had to have the seals from my building analyzed for Jim's DNA. Without video or witnesses, it was the only way to prove that he was my attacker, or at least that he was in my apartment that day. It took a year and a half to get the prosecutor's verdict. No further action. No identifiable DNA other than mine had been found at the crime scene. Unfortunately, I'd probably destroyed it when I took a shower. So, there you have it. Can't pursue the investigation. Can't prove it was Jim. I don't have the memories of the assault itself. I don't think I'll ever remember them. I have no doubt that Jim did this to me though. I think if I ran into him, I would freeze like a rabbit in front of a car. Today, I'm much better, but I still suffer from PTSD. For a while, I couldn't drink any alcohol, because the drunken feeling reminded me of when I was going into unconsciousness. Now I panic when I'm with someone alone and have trouble breathing. Most of all, it makes me sick to know Jim is free to live his life and to try to kill someone else. I don't really know if the people who read this story will find it particularly scary, but it was pretty terrifying when it happened. I guess all I can ask is that you use your imagination and try to imagine what it would be like if this happened to you on a boat in the middle of an ocean. I have a decent-sized boat, not particularly large, actually more of a small fishing vessel. I never used it for that though. I basically only bought it because it was cheap and served my purposes. My purposes being that I wanted to be able to spend time on the ocean with my wife. My wife and I were out one evening and decided to stay out after dark. This was in the Atlantic Ocean. Normally, we didn't do this very often, but the sunset was beautiful that evening, filling the sky with the most beautiful shades of pink I had ever seen. Once the sun had set, the moon was also beautiful. There was just something about sitting on a boat in the middle of the water, watching the sky at night. Absolutely mesmerizing. After quite a bit of time had passed by, we finally decided that we didn't feel like actually sleeping in the boat that night. We could have, but as much as I like being out on the ocean, I don't really like sleeping in a rocking boat. I always wake up with a real stiff neck. I just don't enjoy it. I mean, who would really? As I was getting ready to leave though, there was this loud thud and the boat tilted hard in one direction. Our boat was pretty sturdy, and it would have to take a massive hit in order to get shaken so hard. My wife, understandably alarmed, ran over to me and asked what had happened. I told her I had absolutely no idea. It would be a good idea for us to get on our way in case it happened again, though. Immediately, it did. There was another loud thud, and our boat rocked once again. I looked at my wife, and I could tell she was terrified. I was too, but I tried my best not to let it show. The force of these impacts were making me very concerned. Whatever was hitting our boat was hitting it real hard, and that meant it had enough strength to knock a hole in our boat and sink it if we let this go on. Yeah, we had a dinghy, but what good would a dinghy be when some underwater force was capable of knocking our much larger fishing boat over? I got the boat started and we began on our way back. We hadn't been moving for more than 5 minutes when it happened again a third time. Whatever had been hitting us when we were sitting still was now following us, continuing to hit our boat at full force. My wife had tears in her eyes. We were both terrified. After the next hit, we were convinced whatever was doing this was not going to give up. I tried going faster, as fast as I could possibly force the small boat to go. I wasn't sure how much good it would do though. I was worried the momentum of the boat would help those hits from down under cause even more damage. I was scared of the possibility of the speed causing the ship to capsize. To this day, I'm not even sure if this was a real possibility or not, but to an anxiety-riddled mind, it was something I had to think about. By the time we were slammed into for a 6th time, we were both convinced we were going to die that night out there on the ocean. With the sheer force of the hits, we were surprised the boat hadn't sprung a leak yet. Thankfully, it held together. We braced ourselves for another. When 5 minutes passed without another hit, then 10, then half an hour, we stopped. Although we were relieved it had stopped, we didn't relax at all. We remained tense and scared. I didn't even want to look into the water at any point to see what could be causing it. I was scared as to what I might see. The 7th hit never came. We either outran whatever was hitting us, or it just lost interest. We didn't feel safe until we were on dry land, and it was a very long time before we took the boat out again. A lot of our friends don't believe the story. They think we're trying to create a real-life Moby Dick or something. But hey, the ocean is a huge place. The Pacific Ocean alone is larger than the entire land surface of the world. The sheer volume of water and the very fact that life began in the water tells us a few things. There are some very old things in the ocean, and many things we haven't even the slightest idea about. These things have many places to hide out there. I was having a hard time in life about 13 years ago. I was in college, but I made a few really bad choices in roommates. This meant I ended up moving around a bit here and there during that period of time. I tried not to go back in with my parents for the longest time. I guess if I had, though, I could have spared myself a bit of hardship. Thing is, I didn't want to be a burden on them at all, not even paying for college. I tried to involve them in as little of my decisions as I possibly could, although I have no doubt they would have helped me every time. Before I finally did give in and move back with them, the last place I moved seemed like a pretty decent area at first. It was a house rented by people who were also all around college age, although only one of them was actually a student. Everyone had their own room, and most of them generally kept to themselves. It seemed pretty ideal because of this. Although I did slightly know my roommates, I didn't know them very well at all. Something really strange that I still have a problem explaining happened a little while into the summertime. This was on a weekend when I got home from one summer class that I was taking at the time. I was living about 45 minutes away from the school at this point in a suburb. The classroom I was in the middle of the building and didn't have any windows. By the time I got out of class and then out of the building, I was shocked to see the drastic change in weather that had taken place. When I had gone to class, it was completely sunny without a single cloud in the sky. By the time I got out, though, it was a completely different story. The sky was full of fast-moving green and black clouds, and even though it was only mid-afternoon, it was completely dark outside. The wind was blowing pretty hard, too, and who knew how much worse it was going to get. I jumped in my car and headed home, hoping I would somehow make it before the rain started pouring down. I didn't think it could get much worse as I was driving home, but the wind was blowing my small car around on the road. I watched as grocery carts rolled around in parking lots by themselves, hitting cars as lightning filled up the sky. Fortunately, it seemed it was just a lot of buildup at first. I was able to get home before anything really happened. By the time I did get there, though, according to the radio, we were on tornado watch. I have to mention all this because I don't think this would have happened if it hadn't have been for the storm. One of my roommates decided to have some people over to party a little bit during it. It didn't really bother me though. The entire time I lived there, I basically spent all my time alone in my bedroom. A bit of noise wouldn't bother me, and there was no way that it would compare to the noise already being created by the storm anyway. I was in my desk chair on my computer, watching the storm, when I heard some noises and voices I didn't know out in the hallway. And that's when I opened my door and noticed these people going into my roommate's room. Well, my roommate had just told me he was going to have some people over to hang out and enjoy the storm. I didn't really care because of this, and was about to go back to my room. One of the guys stopped and decided to talk to me though. I didn't really want to stop and chat, but he was polite, and I was a little too polite to try and get away as well. I'm one of those people that can easily be trapped into a conversation. After a while, he was called away to the other room to join them. I went ahead back into my room and locked my door. I always kept my door locked when I was home. It wasn't even a real lock really. You could easily unlock it from the outside by using a screwdriver, or even just your fingernail to turn the little switch on the outside of the knob. It didn't take long before I heard a knock. It was weird because no one had ever knocked on my door for any reason. When I got up to check, it was the friend who had stayed back. He had a couple drinks in his hand and offered me one. Although I had plenty of my own alcohol, I decided to indulge. He asked if I wanted to come to the other room and join their party. I declined. I let him know I wasn't really good around a whole lot of people I didn't know. We talked for a few minutes while I finished the drink. Then he was called back into the other room. While I was sitting at my computer though, I began to feel very strange. I can tell you I have a really high tolerance for alcohol. Sometimes I tend to drink more than I should, but I didn't have a single thing that night, other than the drink the friend of my roommate gave me. Things went black for a little while. Then I was suddenly awake and looking around in my room. I found myself lying on the floor. I looked around and didn't see anything though. Things went black again. I woke up once more and the guy who had given me the drink was in my bedroom. He wasn't doing anything though. He was just standing over me looking down at me. I looked over at the door and saw that it was locked. My mind told me he must have unlocked it to get in the room, and it sent out warning signals to my brain. Before I could do anything though, everything went black once again. I couldn't make any sense of what was going on. In the few moments of clarity I had, I suspected he must have slipped something into my drink. It was the only thing that could explain what was going on. Even though I was totally out of it, I was scared out of my mind. When I woke up again, once again he wasn't really doing anything. He was sitting on the perch of my bed like a gargoyle staring down at me. I looked at him and felt dizzy. I was confused. I tried to do anything, but I couldn't talk or move at all. It was like I was paralyzed. All I could do was black out again. I must have been out for a really long time. When I finally got up once more, I was able to move. This time though, the guy was not in my room anymore. I managed to get up to my feet, but I stumbled and fell and hurt myself. It was hard to move, and I laid there for a while. The following day, I felt like crap. I woke up when there was a knock at my door. It was my roommate. He told me he had caught that friend breaking into my room, going through my belongings. My roommate then threw him out of the house. That's the scariest thing that ever happened to me, not being able to move or even make sense of what was going on around me. I hope that never happens to anyone else. This story happened a really long time ago, and by a long time, I mean a really long time. I'm in my 70s now, and must have been just around 15 years old when this happened. I will never forget it though. I grew up in a small town that was visited by a circus once a year. It would be a 3-day event on Friday. The circus would have a big parade that went right through the middle of town. Then they would have a performance that night. The following 2 days, there would be a sort of carnival on the circus grounds during the day, followed by various shows during night. I was personally very fond of the trapeze artist myself. My family lived in town, and our road was on the parade route. So when it was time for the parade to come through, we would all rush out and sit in the front yard to watch it pass by. It was a bright and sunny day this year, and the Grand Marshal heralded one of the best parades I'd ever seen. During the parade, one thing, even at my young age though, caught me off guard. Most of the circus acts marched together in the parade. The trapeze artists were all together, the animals were all together, the clowns were all together. All of the other groups were much the same way. I noticed, though, that towards the end of the parade there seemed to be one straggler, a lone clown who seemed completely out of place. He was very entertaining, though, and I didn't have a fear of clowns like some other people do. No one seemed to notice or care that he was nowhere near the others. He would go up to spectators on the side of the street and spray some flour on his costume. To others, he would make all sorts of weird clown gestures with his hands. I'm not really sure what to call it other than clown gestures, really. When the clown got up to my yard, though, he stopped and looked at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. He smiled. It was creepy for some reason to see him smiling within his painted-on smile. He walked up to me and patted me on the head before taking his hand off. He then took his finger and ran it down the side of my face. Then he rushed off. It was quite weird, but I didn't really think about it too much. He was a clown, and sometimes clowns act weird. Later in the evening, my family and I went to the night show as well. I watched the clown portion of the show and was relieved in a way that the weird clown was in there for a few moments. I'd had an inkling of an idea that maybe he wasn't actually part of the circus and had somehow interjected himself into the parade. I'm not sure why I thought that, but I had been a little worried up until I saw he was a part of the actual crew. The show was really great, honestly, and my family left and went home. When we were home and I was laying there in bed, something woke me up in the middle of the night. I really wasn't sure what it was at first. After I'd been awake for a few moments, though, I heard something sort of like a rock hitting my window. You know exactly the sound I'm talking about. I crawled out of bed and got up. I gazed out the window, only to see that no one or no thing was there. I thought it must have been my imagination until I heard it once more. I went back quickly and looked out the window, fully expecting to see someone outside, but once again no one was there. At this point, though, I was now fully awake. I was pretty thirsty as well, so I decided I was going to go downstairs and get myself a glass of water. I walked down and went into the kitchen and grabbed a drink. After taking my first gulp, I turned and walked back into the living room. I dropped my glass and screamed when I saw that clown looking in through the living room window, waving at me in the darkness. He blew me a kiss and stared for a moment before running off. My screaming, of course, woke my parents up, who rushed downstairs. I explained to them what I saw. They didn't really do anything about it, though. I mean, sure, the clown was on our property, but they couldn't prove it. And even if we could, all he did was wave and blow a kiss at me. This was a much different time than nowadays. Clowns really didn't have the stigma they have nowadays either. Regardless, it was a pretty creepy experience, seeing that clown waving at me through my own living room window in the middle of the night. I remained inside the house until the circus left town a few days later. This happened when I was out with some friends of mine, just off the coast of Washington. My friend Todd had this really cool boat. I honestly don't know enough about boats to tell you what kind it was, or what you would call it even, but it was a fairly decent-sized vessel. It was large enough for the 5 of us to be more than comfortable. It had an inner chamber with a small kitchen, bathroom, and even bunks to sleep on as well. Quite a nice thing, all in all. Now, Todd really liked being out on the ocean because he felt it was the freest place a person could be. He would often drive out to international waters to explore. I could never really understand his desire to do that. Not only was he getting way too far away from the shore, scary to me already, but I'd heard that in international waters, there were pretty much not any laws at all. Now, whether or not that's actually true, I don't really know enough to say. I also didn't ask because I didn't want Todd to think I was a moron. Later in the day on this outing, Todd was getting the itch, so to speak, to go out and explore further away from the coast. I made some mild objections, but didn't really want to appear like a big wuss in front of my buddies. I didn't object too strongly because of this. For the most part, I thought Todd knew what he was doing. I was a complete novice when it came to anything out in the water, so better to trust him instead of trying my own stuff. We had been cruising along for quite a long time. Despite my initial fear, I was now sitting up front on the ship and enjoying the amazing view. The ocean was so enormous. Thinking about how large it was made me feel dizzy, but it was pretty awesome. It had been a while since we'd seen anything but water, though. While I was sitting there watching, I did notice something seemingly moving up in the distance. Immediately, I called Todd's attention over to it. He told me it was just another boat and not to worry about it. Probably just some other people doing the exact same thing we were doing. He then, though, had the genius idea to go up to them and see what they were up to. I was absolutely against this. I had no problem indicating so to Todd. However, he just brushed me off immediately. It was his boat and he was going to do what he wanted to do. So we slowly headed off in the direction of that boat. Little by little, we came closer and closer to the ship. Todd was going fairly slowly, I guess so as to not surprise them. They hadn't really indicated they had seen us, though. As we got closer, I noticed this boat was not nearly as nice as Todd's was. It was about the same size and looked like it had an inside compartment as well, but we didn't see anybody on deck. It was not moving either. Now, you'll have to forgive me again if you're a boating person. As I mentioned before, I don't really know much. For me, all I know is turn the boat on and it goes vroom. When the boat gave no indication that it was aware we were there, and because it seemed like it was adrift, Todd got a bit more cautious. He tried to radio in to the other boat, but he got no response from them. He was quite worried now that something must be wrong. We approached the boat carefully. We kept a decent distance, though, because the last thing any of us wanted was a collision. Todd knew what he was doing, thankfully, as he maneuvered us a bit closer. I have to admit, this was a bit of a rush. I was worried that something bad had happened to whoever was on the boat, but the mystery of this all was so exciting. When we were very, very close, where we would have communicated verbally if someone was there, I started to notice some movement. Suddenly, a very short man came sprinting out on deck. He was the gnarliest looking man I'd ever seen, dressed in ragged clothes and a long scraggly beard. He also only had one arm. He was holding a knife in his hand, and he was covered in blood. The little man began to scream at us. "Come closer, you fuckers, so I can slice you up." He yelled some other obscenities too. Alarmed, I jumped back. When I did, I saw another man come onto deck. He was much larger than the other guy, and he was carrying a gun. He had a much different message for us than the dwarf. He pointed the gun at us and commanded, "You turn the fuck around!" The dwarf ran over to the wheel and started the engine, looking over at Todd as he did so. I don't think Todd needed to be told twice. He turned the boat around and we sped off. Fortunately, even though it seemed the smaller man wanted to come after us, Todd's boat was faster and we lost them very quickly. He didn't slow down until the boat was completely out of sight and we saw the land again. I'm not entirely sure what to think about what happened. Todd was freaked out, but later he told me he thought it might have been a joke. I was shocked and asked him how he could have possibly come to that conclusion. He then told me if he had looked like a pirate and was in a boat in the middle of nowhere and had seen a group of people like us, he would have played a similar prank. I don't think that's the case, though. It really scared the crap out of me, at least. I'm a 28-year-old woman, and this happened to me when I was 13 years old. I'm an adult now, and I'm still kind of traumatized, to be honest with you. For a little bit of context, at 13, I transferred schools due to a lack of money. The school I went to was a cheaper private school. because where I lived, the public ones really sucked. I didn't have any friends for at least the first couple of months. I started noticing this boy, Victor. He was always staring at me during classes, in the hallways by the window. He'd stare at me at lunch as well. It was a pretty everyday thing. I didn't really care though. I was at an age when I only thought about stupid kid stuff like dolls or whatever. Oh, one more thing. I was flat as a table back then, so I looked like a really small child. The girls in my class started saying that Victor must have a crush on me. That creeped me out, obviously, because he was 18 years old. Still though, I didn't really think much about it as long as he didn't try to approach me or anything. Things escalated quickly, however. Victor started to follow me home every day. Thank God I moved since then, and he doesn't know where I live anymore. The most annoying thing he'd do, however, was that he'd constantly ask his friends to try and talk to me and try to convince me to go out with him and make out with them after school. These talks would usually take about 30 minutes of them trying extremely hard to convince me to go along with this. Victor would be behind them watching the conversation like some kind of freak. Obviously, I rejected him every time. Being the nice guy that he said he was, though, he spread rumors about us making out anyway. Nobody believed him because he was such a weird guy. The whole school knew about the events. The final straw, though, was when our school had to take a trip to a book fair. I was super excited. At this point, I had made a couple of friends of my own. On our way to this fair, I was on the bus with my friend. Victor was about 3 seats behind us. I could feel his eyes boring into my back the entire way there. Out of nowhere, he came and asked for my friend's cell phone because he needed to call someone. She handed it over to him, thinking he was telling the truth. How stupid of her. He returned her cell phone not even 2 minutes later. She checked to see if he'd done anything and showed me that he'd secretly taken a bunch of photos of me. I guess this was his way of saying that he'd already done this at some point before. She got extremely pissed and went to go confront him. When she returned, she looked extremely scared and said the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life. She told me that he'd cornered her and said that for confronting her, that when she least expected it, he'd push her into a bathroom and rape her. Today, the only thing that went through my mind was, what should I do now? I peeked over at him and he gave me this creepy smile. After this, I went the whole day looking behind my back, not leaving the side of my teacher or my friend. She didn't understand why I didn't want to walk around and explore at the fair. I was in alert mode the whole time though. Thank God nothing bad happened. When I came home, I cried in my room like a baby. This was at the end of the year, and thankfully I switched schools soon after. I told my mom this, and she told me, yeah, that stuff happens. It happened to me too when I was your age. I was so shocked about how this was such a seemingly common thing. I'm 28 now, and I still see Victor out on the streets. He's even followed me around a few times. I always walk in circles until I lose him, but sometimes he tries to wait for me outside stores or restaurants. I think about what would have happened to me in the book fair if I didn't have my teacher next to me the whole time. I wonder if one day he'll try to do something, or he'll just keep up this creepy behavior. When I was a teenager in the 1970s, I had the coolest bedroom. The room was sort of a dormer design with the ceiling slanted downward, great for hanging some psychedelic posters. The bedroom had crawl spaces attached as well, great for stashing stuff when I was older. Best of all was the window that opened to the garage roof, easy to scramble out there without the parents knowing. Anyway, a couple of strange things happened to me in that bedroom when I was 13 or 14 years old. In this series of strange events, the creepiest thing happened to me one night in the spring when I was reading in bed at around 8 o'clock at night. I had the window open and the bedroom door closed. The rest of the family was home. I could hear them downstairs watching Happy Days together or something. As a teenager though, I was way too cool for that, which is why I was in my bedroom doing some really cool reading. All of a sudden, though, I heard something big moving around on the garage roof. The bed was right under the window, so I could hear it very plainly. I couldn't see anything because of the angle, though. That anything would be on the roof at all was a big shock to me. There weren't any trees anywhere close by, and the house had an aluminum siding as well. It's not like a cat could just climb up the side or something. I was thinking maybe a big bird landed on the garage roof, perhaps an owl or something. It was a bit strange at that time of night, though. Then it got real scary. I could faintly make out that whatever was out there was starting to breathe really heavily. As the breathing got closer and closer to the window, it started to sound more and more like a person. I could hear the breathing getting louder as they approached close to the opening. It got closer and closer. The breathing was so loud now. I was frozen in terror, huddled in the corner of my bed underneath that window. I wanted to leap up and run down the stairs, but I was paralyzed in fear. Whatever was out there was only a few feet away from my face now. I imagined them looking in through the window at me. Even though I could hear my family watching TV downstairs, I was so scared I was holding my breath, trying not to make a single noise. After a minute or two, during which I felt like there were eyes piercing me with their gaze, whatever it was started moving away from the window. I could hear the heavy breathing getting fainter in the night. And once I could barely hear the thing, still too scared to move, I started screaming bloody murder. My two brothers came running up the stairs to see what was wrong. I told them something was out on the roof. They rushed out to take a look, only to tell me I was full of shit and to quit wasting their time. Then they rushed back downstairs to watch TV. I closed and locked the window, shut the blinds, and moved my bed to the other side of the room. The next morning, in the light of the day, I went to check, but I didn't see anything out of ordinary on the garage roof. Needless to say, it was months before I dared to open that window again. I think the scariest thing about the ocean is how much happens out there without you ever knowing and without consequence. That might not make too much sense, but it will after you hear this story of what happened to me. I was out in my boat with a couple of friends, Joe, Wendy, and Tom. We were having a really good day, just enjoying the water. I don't want to give out the location because the situation was way too disturbing, but we had gone pretty far out there. Normally, we wouldn't stay out too long after dark, but we were having such a good time drinking, telling stories, and the sky was so clear and beautiful that we decided to stay a bit longer. If you've never seen the clear sky at night out on the ocean, then I hope you get the chance to sometime. We were up on deck when a sudden flash of light caught our eye. Tom went over to the side of the boat and shined one of the lights in the direction of that flash. When he did, we saw something that really surprised us. There was a much smaller boat out there in the middle of the darkness, and I mean, this was a really small boat. Sort of like a personal motorboat, not the one you would ever expect people to be using except in more shallow water. It was quite a surprise. It seemed to be floating right in our direction, caught adrift. We tried to make contact with the boat. We figured it was unlikely they were using radio, so we used our sound signal to blast 5 short and very quick blasts of sound toward them. The signal tells the other boat that you don't really know what their intent is. I mean, we didn't think they were up to anything bad really, but it was weird to see such a tiny boat that far out and apparently adrift. There was no response at all. We debated about what we should do. Wendy suggested we should just leave it, because whoever it was must have been up to something shady. Tom and I didn't really think that would be the right choice, though. Joe wanted to approach the boat, and although I was a bit nervous about the idea, I told him that as long as we kept our distance, we could try and get a closer look at what was going on. We slowly started to approach the tiny boat. We shone our lights, but we were still not getting any sort of response. Even a small motorboat colliding with a much bigger boat like ours could still cause damage, so we had to be very careful approaching. I preferred to get close to it before possibly grabbing it with a beam if needed. I can't tell you the right words to explain how creepy it was in the dark, watching this small boat just slowly coming towards us in the water. We watched as it bobbed up and down with the waves. just a shadow on the vast ocean. We pulled up as close as we were comfortable with. I called out, asking if anyone was in need of assistance. There was no answer, but there was clearly something sitting at the wheel. We told the driver we were going to shine our light over there. This was a precaution so we didn't blind the man. He didn't answer, so we went ahead and did so. As we did, though, I realized there was no way the lights could have hurt his eyes in the first place. He didn't have any. All this man had were 2 empty sockets coated with dry and crusty blood. The man was obviously dead. My friends wanted to leave and get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, but I didn't feel right leaving a dead guy out in the middle of the ocean that way. We carefully pulled the boat close to us, and I called the Coast Guard. It took a while, but they came out and got the boat and took us in for some questioning. They were fine with us, not accusing us or anything, but also not telling us much of what they thought either. To this day, I don't know any details of who that man was or what happened to him to make him like that. Honestly, I'm happy I don't. I don't really need to know. I remember the looks of those 2 empty eye sockets as that dead man floated on his boat out on the ocean, a lifeless and directionless captain on a dead vessel. I don't ever need to know anything else about him. I don't think I could handle it. So I'm a huge fan of hiking, or simply taking walks in the woods as well. The only time I go alone is when I'm in the woods I live near. This day I was not. I was with my friend Lars in a walk about 3 hours from my home. We were planning on traveling around and staying at motels in the meantime. That day, we decided to take a walk in a popular area for people who like to walk in the woods like me. Catch was that these woods were freaking huge. Not really bad for us though. We were thrilled actually. There wasn't very much to do there, although it was very pretty. We escaped the crowd, but every now and then we would still see someone walking by. We walked for a while until we got to this spot not too different from the rest, except for one thing. Nobody else was around in this section. That's why Lars and I had taken this turn. The other one had quite a few people on it still. After a while of walking down this empty path, we were surprised when we spotted a man, a completely naked man. We gave each other a look and turned around immediately. The man was slightly off the path, seemingly bent over and looking at something. As Lars and I were walking back, talking about that strange man, I heard a voice call out from behind me. I turned to see the man. He was calling out to us about some bug he had just picked up. I got a real good look at him. He was a bit tall, though nothing crazy, bald with a few brown hairs growing out. Completely naked, though. I flashed the man a smile and started walking faster. We got out of the place as fast as we could. Once we got to the car, we actually kind of laughed at ourselves. Yeah, it was kind of weird, but actually it was weirdly funny thinking on it after. The car ride was nothing really to talk about, so skip back to the motel. As we're checking in, we see the man walk in. He was a bit hard to recognize, considering the fact that he now had clothes on, just a bit torn up. He waited behind us in line. Good thing we were almost done checking in, because as soon as we did, we went right to our room and locked it with no other thoughts. Now this was definitely creepy. Was he following us, or was it just a coincidence and he happened to be staying at the same motel? We both decided we weren't going to stay for more than one night. Heck, I didn't even want to stay one night if it weren't for Lars telling me it would be fine. That night, Lars wanted to go out for a cigarette. I don't smoke myself, but no way was I going to stay in the room alone. I followed him outside and we chatted for a bit. After a few minutes though, I see that guy walk out of one of the doors. Lars put out his cigarette immediately and began to walk inside. Before we managed to get in, we saw the guy pull out a knife from his jacket. It was dark, so I couldn't really see. I did see he'd started carving through his sleeve though and right into his arm. I saw blood trickling to the ground. I rushed into the lobby. Lars got the same idea and followed. We alerted the staff, but by the time they got someone to come out and check, the man had completely disappeared. To this day, I have no idea what was going on with that man. Did he follow us? Why was he naked in the woods? And why did he just randomly start stabbing himself? I'll never know the answer. but honestly, I'm still spooked. So I'm a fisherman. I had to go take a shit at about 2 in the morning. I didn't tell the guy on watch I was going out on deck though. Our toilet was a 5-gallon bucket on the starboard side of the vessel. So there I am doing my business, when all of a sudden I see this huge wave coming at us broadside. All I could think was that I was going to get swept off my bucket and sent flying across the deck with my pants down. And turds would surely scrape across my face right before my fanny pack style CO2 primed flotation device exploded. Just as this huge wave was about to sweep over me, the boat rolled and met the wave, sending a spray vaulting vertically high into the air. I was able to let out a quick sigh of relief before I saw another giant wave rolling towards us. I was furiously trying to get out of the way as the wave smashed into the side of the vessel. The spray must have shot 100 feet into the air above the railing. It was as if Poseidon himself had kindly offered to bidet my butthole. I furiously pulled up my shorts. As I turned to jettison my crap overboard and head back inside, I saw the largest wave I'd ever seen in my life, bigger than the last 2 waves combined. In a panic, I dropped the shit bucket and bolted back inside. I could feel the boat lurching in the storm, threatening to tip over. Luckily, after that wave passed, everything seemed to go back to normal. Well, at least as normal as it can be with the boat rocking about in the storm. It might not be the most scary or life-threatening, but the idea of getting swept across the deck into the ocean and being covered with turds along the way was definitely scary to me. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.